10th, and then we'll get into the Lynch Elementary, which we have 5 or 6 bullet items to address, and then we'll review our next meeting dates and some subcommittee for the Lynch School. This is just a brief description, and Chris has it up for everyone to see the detail right now. So I think we can get right into meeting minutes for the January 10th. Has everyone had a chance to review and comment back to Dawn? Are we okay to accept them? All right. Any issues? So we'll do a roll call for the January 10th meeting minutes.
So motion to approve, and just to remind the committee, those were already submitted in draft form because they had to go in on the 18th as part of the PDP, but just as a draft. I had taken a look at them as well. They look pretty good. So move to approve as presented minutes from January 10th.
Chris, and a second?
Second.
Mark? I will do a roll call. Geetha?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Brian? Colleen?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
That's it. So passed. All in favor. And then Lynch Elementary. And we're going to start with the Chris and Charlie to give an update on the Wellfield site.
Chris Nixon, you may be muted.
Yeah, Jay, are we doing the website update after that? Forgive me, I don't have the agenda right in front of me.
Oh, sorry. Website is first. Sorry, Chris first.
Right. I didn't. I
Website first.
apologize. I didn't have the agenda in front of me. I got multiple screens open. Okay, so this will be really quick. So folks, particularly members of the public who were with us at the last meeting, will find the Lynch project homepage familiar. There have been a few updates, so an opportunity to remind folks your landing pad for information is lynch2025.com. Not going to spend as much detail on this as I did last week, but just to remind everybody, the homepage, we'll always kind of keep it short and sweet. We've got kind of a what's new section. In this instance, we've updated the outcome of the meeting on the 10th and our review of those 11 schemes. We continue to indicate to the public literally what's next. In this case, we're highlighting the meeting tonight with a link to the webinar. We will always have our very high-level schedule you can see here at the bottom of the page. One important change is we've jumped through one hoop, so the PDP submittal from January 18th is now marked completed as we continue to work towards our submission for the PSR by March 3rd. If we go to the design page, there's actually a link to it right here. We discussed last time the 11 early site options and how we were narrowing those down. So we're always going to make every effort when there's new information that the committee has reviewed and discussed to put it on the web page. So what the public will now find here is our kind of what I'm calling the Lynch 6 right now. We've got the renovation option, the add reno option that we've narrowed down, and then we have in play 4 replacement options. And as Charlie from TAPE and Chris have reminded us all, the MSBA actually requires us to submit one of each. We have to submit a reno, we have to submit an add reno, and we have to submit a replacement. So what we're really looking to do is to kind of narrow these 6 down to 3. And for those who are interested, it looks small here, but the resolution's pretty good. You can zoom into this on your computer, on any mobile device. We have the grid of the original 11 options that were presented. Other updates I can share would be if we go to the presentations page very quickly. Again, for members of the public who maybe have missed earlier meetings, and again, I thank everybody at WinCam for making this look easy. Key presentations on the Lynch project can be found here. Recording of our meeting on January 10th is now available right here. It's on YouTube, and we will continue to populate this field down below with important documents or files. And so on that note, I'm going to try to do this without giving everybody a headache. We wanted to segue out of the website presentation, and I'm clicking very quickly through our kickoff presentation from November 16th that we made in the morning at Town Hall, and then again at Winchester High School. So what we wanted to do tonight was just take a moment for anybody who's kind of new to this process to circle back on this. You can certainly get access to the full presentation on the project website, lynch2025.com. But Jay, I wonder if Vivian Varbedian's with us. She's project director from Hill International, the OPM. Maybe Vivian could just take a moment and highlight what these elements represent and where we are in the process, and maybe Charlie can add any color he feels is necessary.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. And just a reminder, as Chris Nixon mentioned, there are many opportunities that we will be engaging with the Massachusetts School Building Authority and making submissions with your approval on your behalf for this project. We are currently in module number 3. So module number 1 is the eligibility period, which the district has already entered and was successful into moving forward and being accepted into the program with Massachusetts School Building Authority, where we lovingly call them MSBA. Modular number 2 is building the project team. And that is when we, as your OPM, Owner's Project Manager, came on board along with your architectural team by TAP A. So modular number 3 is where we start the feasibility study. And the feasibility study has 2 components. The first component is the preliminary design program, which we already made a submission to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, on your behalf based on your approval and vote on January 18th. That submission included the educational program, the initial space summary on what spaces would be required based off of the educational program, and evaluating the existing conditions and facilities, as well as site development requirements. So the 6 options or more that you had been already privy to and can be found on the website all fall under our requirements and guidelines for the preliminary design program, PDP. Where now we're moving into the next phase under feasibility, which is the preferred schematic report, where we would look to you as the EFPBC to evaluate the various options and start narrowing it down, as Chris mentioned, still having one that is a renovation, one that is an addition renovation, and one that is a replacement, where ultimately you start looking at the various options, having a multitude of them and narrowing it down to closer to 3 and then inevitably down to 1. So in the preferred schematic report, or PSR, we will have a short listed of options. We will also have the final option analysis and evaluation, looking at the site conditions, as well as a very, very high level cost. And making a selection, you will be asked to review, analyze, and make a preferred selection that we, on your behalf, based off of your approval and vote, will make a submission to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. This will have also conceptual floor plans and site plans, and a very conceptual, like I said, a very high level cost for the total project budget, not just for the construction. After that submission, we will look to meet with the MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority, and seek approval to move forward to the schematic design portion. Here in the schematic design report that we will make a submission to the MSBA later, closer to the end of the year, beginning of next, will include a schematic design that is 30% finished. You will also find in the program traffic analysis, environmental, geotechnical, code analysis, sustainability, as well as other requirements, room data sheets. The project delivery method will need to be evaluated and determined by this point and this submission, whether you choose to go with a construction manager at risk or the traditional design bid build process. Construction cost estimate will also be included, as well as a total project budget and a schedule. And where we will look to maximize the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority's reimbursement rate for this district and for this project. I know I gave a lot of details. I'll pause for any questions from the committee before I turn it over to Tape.
We're good.
Seeing none. Charlie, if you'd like to walk us through what was included as part of.
Do we want to talk about the PDP? We thinking about talking? I'm sorry. I guess so. The PDP, I mean, fundamentally, I think I don't have much to add here. I mean, in terms of process, the PDP is really about fact finding and about existing conditions. We've done that, and the PSR is really about, as Vivian said, the final proposed options, of which we will have 3, but you will ultimately select one of the 3 as the preferred option. And it will be, that will be submitted as a conceptual option, and then we'll really get into the detail in earnest in schematic design.
Based off of the agenda items, next, I believe on the agenda for the Lynch Elementary School is the Wellfield parcel and a status update,
Correct.
as well as then moving into the visioning sessions and high-level highlights outcome of what the visioning sessions produced.
So I guess I would let Meg and Chris and fill in the blanks here on the wellhead. We do have surveyors in the field doing an actual on-the-ground survey, a field survey. So we'll have some information on physical characteristics and on topography pretty soon here, hopefully within a month. And but what we don't have yet, and what Chris and Meg may have more insight on, is the actual legal description of the metes and bounds of the water department land. So that's the next big challenge, because we want to get that ultimately. But we will soon at least have an on-the-ground survey complete of that area.
Yeah, so a high-level process, and Meg can maybe just speak to where we stand and kind of digging up information. But again, for those members of the public who aren't already familiar, pulling up the site page on the project website, the very large, almost 4-acre squarish parcel that rests right in the middle of the site. This is not does not belong to the school department, and is increasingly proving to be kind of essential in some of the options that the EFPBC is carefully considering. It's been made clear to the EFPBC that any preferred option that should rely on some portion of this parcel is not going to be voted by the MSBA until and unless that land falls under the control of the district. Currently, it's under the control of the select board. So the EFPBC back in December, I think it was, actually voted. They requested the school committee to consider a land transfer and to initiate that process with the select board. School committee met, discussed it with the superintendent, and we have actually voted to move that process forward and make that formal request. So select board is aware of it, management is aware of it. There is going to be a select board meeting on Monday, February 7th. We do have an EFPBC meeting that night, but we're apart here a little bit in terms of time. We start at 6, they start at 7:30. February 7th will be an update meeting to the select board on the Lynch project. And included in that meeting will be a conversation about a transfer of the parcel. We envision that this is going to require a joint meeting between the select board and the school committee. The board needs to sort of vote to give it to the school committee, and the school committee needs to vote to accept it. But then ultimately it gets perfected, if you will, at spring town meeting. Town meeting has to actually formalize that transfer. Therefore, this becomes a critical path item. As our town meeting members are well aware, the warrant goes out well ahead of town meeting. So we're going to be busily kind of figuring out what we can put together in the form of an article for the warrant in February, I presume, early March for Springtown meeting action. This is important because while we may submit a preferred option to the MSBA in March, without that land really being ours yet, that's okay. The issue is the board can't vote until the land has been transferred. So this is why Springtown meeting becomes critical path. With a project funding agreement voted by the MSBA, subsequently, the plan is to come back to fall town meeting to actually approve the project and then a debt exclusion override in January. And by that point, as Vivian and Charlie have said, we'll know much more about what this project looks like, what it costs, and how we will be building it. So that's kind of high level stuff. I don't know if Meg has any details she can add in terms of the grind on the ground, pulling this information together.
Just that our legal team is still doing a title search, and the records are quite old, so they're in the archives at the Registry of Deeds. So it's taking some time to get them, but they're working on it. And every week they say we're going to have them, and I think it's just getting the people at the registry to actually get that work done. But we hope to have that information soon, hopefully by February 7th, so that all that information can be made available to both the school committee and the select board at that meeting.
I have a question, Chris. Charlie just mentioned the crew is out there doing surveying, and I was just wondering whether you could bring that figure that you had up there, Chris, and just wanted to ask a question, if that helps. The chain link fence at the Lynch School, and is it possible, Chris, that you can bring
I'm just, give me you can keep talking, just give me like 5 seconds.
Yeah. So my basically question is, obviously the surveyors are out there doing the survey. So I guess the chain link fence, that's between the parking lot and the field. So my question is, what extent the surveys are covering? So if you look over the chain link fence towards the trees, the grades drop down almost over 20 feet. So to the visual eye, so just wondering, the survey work that's being done in a gross sense with the mouse kind of show us what area that they're covering, just trying to get an idea so that it would lead to a follow-up of the options discussion that we have. I know last time we mentioned about there's a 5 feet drop in the grade, that perhaps maybe, let's say the north side is the field, ball field, south side is the existing Lynch School, and let's say west side is Pond Street, and east is Pond Brook Road. So I guess, maybe from east to west, there is a 5 feet of difference. But if you sort of look over the chain link fence down there, there is quite a drop. So I was just wondering what area of the extent the survey is out there covering, and what are we planning to get back, So that would lead to the rest of the discussions, I think.
So I'll keep the image up, but maybe Charlie is the best to address that question in terms of scope.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think anybody can see my cursor or mouse, right? And I can't annotate. Okay. So it will include most of the wooded area, or the entire wooded area between the fields and the Lynch School site, and going in an easterly direction. I believe they're going probably. I think they're going to pick up. So they already did. They did wetland flagging, and I think they're going to pick up flags at the wetland, and then probably go as far as the 100-foot setback, maybe, in terms of physical characteristics and topography. They're not going all the way to Hornbrook, because obviously it's not.
The point I'm trying to make
buildable.
is,
so most of the area that we're talking about, I think, will be surveyed by the time they're done.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make, Charlie, is I think in our web page or the Google Drive, I think Chris has some directory called site information or something. And I did find that was pre-construction grade before the Lynch School, I believe 1958 or something. And then it did have a grade after the Lynch School that itself would give us a sense. But if in between, I mean, after the Lynch School and now, and for Visual Eye, there had been there's a, what's the right word? There's a gully or the drainage ditch almost 20 feet between in that wooded area to a naked eye. Because the last weekend when it rained, I just made it a chance to drive by there to see. And I'll hold the rest of the point to the remaining discussion of the existing site drainage and whatnot. But at least for now, I just wanted to get an idea. When the surveys are done, are we going to cover the wooded area as well? So that's the point of the question.
Yep.
So certainly what will be interesting, though, I think, Geeta, is once that survey is complete to compare it back to those older 1950 surveys. And I'm really thankful that Sean was able to pull those up in the engineering vault. It'll be very interesting to see what's similar and what's different.
Yeah, yeah.
So Jay, I'm looking through the attendee list, and I'm not seeing anyone with a raised hand. So and I'm going to ask Dr. Hackett if he could look as well. So this might be last call. Anybody, member of the public, wishes to speak, you can raise your digital hand. If elsewhere during the presentation, we would certainly like to try, if anyone's presenting something tonight, use an acronym that doesn't make sense, or if there's some technical jargon that we lose people, we can certainly type a question in the Q&A and we'll try to clarify, but we're going to try to limit that tonight so that the EFPBC can kind of hear the presentation. So I'm not seeing anyone. Are you, Dr. Hackett? Okay. But we certainly thank the 30 members of the public who are with us tonight and watching, and we're very happy to have you. Last plug is you can always send a question to lynch2025faq@gmail.com. It is working, and I know it because I'm getting some colorful spam emails. They are from no one in Winchester with a legitimate question about the project, however, so you can always fire that off if you like. So with that, Jay, I think we move on to
visioning
recap.
Yep. We're going on to the visioning session recap, and that would be by Tape.
Yep, I think Chris is going to share his screen if he can and talk through that process with you, which was a great process. It's always really super exciting. It's a wonderful kind of exercise, and it was an opportunity to really hear from parents and staff about how they envisioned it, and it was run by David Stevens, who's a terrific educational consultant.
All right, there we go.
Chris? Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we were going to start here. This is some educational visioning notes from the broader report that was included in the PSR. But just as a refresher, it was several days of work and notes and culminated in this report that kind of drives the educational vision, which helps inform Dr. Hackett's educational program, or the district's educational program, that I'm sure had lots of input from multiple sources. So these are just some of the big picture highlights from our perspective. The guiding principles that come out of that, which sort of start to make their way into the design over time, and then the 21st century design patterns, all of which really kind of help us think through how the schools should be situated. So a lot of these, some of them are not necessarily architectural in the nature of what they're saying, but they do influence how architecture shapes out. So we like to keep track of all of that. Over on the right are some word clouds that, word clouds, they work in the sense of responses that were happening during the visioning sessions. And then the larger the word, the more times that word came up in sort of the response from the attendees of the workshops. And so these just kind of highlight some of the other aspects of the Lynch that need to come forward as any project progresses. And so you'll see down on the bottom one, some of those, there's the 5 C's of 21st century education. But some of those are coming out, which are creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking. And then community is what a lot of this stuff up here is on the top word cloud, is really kind of the essence of community, is some of these things up here on the top. Then towards the end of the visioning sessions, we ventured into some breakout groups that were then diagramming different components of the school. And the top left was really looking at the sort of whole school and maybe how the school could be situated with, different neighborhoods of learning. And the key takeaway is that the school, the people in that group wanted to make sure the school was zoned so that we have, different types of responses in different areas. And also it can be broken down into smaller schools, smaller spaces if needed, or after hours when the community might use the building. Then the one directly below that says neighborhood elements. This was a group that looked specifically at how a classroom neighborhood might be broken down. And I think that this response was maybe taking a look at two age groups or two grade groups in a common neighborhood. And so this diagram is helping to get to the essence of how things can be grouped and accessed around. Again, these aren't really architectural in nature. They're just diagrams to show adjacencies and programmatic relationships. And then back in the middle on the top, you'll see a diagram that talks about the community spaces and how those interact with the school at large, and maybe some other spaces that serve double duty for community and also educational during the day. And so as the building lays out, what we found is that group was talking about a community entrance that could have, support spaces or meeting spaces off of that, like maybe a smaller scale type space. But then the big program elements for the school, gym, library, cafeteria, maybe art and music towards the back edge of that, they were all accessible off of this sort of community entrance corridor. And having the gym be able to have separate entrances, and then maybe a stage that's between cafeteria and gym if possible. And then further diagramming that out on the diagram below that talks about the interrelationship between entry, loud spaces, quiet spaces, and then like the communal spaces, and then the classroom wings being sort of furthest out and having more layered access control than, say, the beginning part of the building that most people can come into when they need to. We also looked at the exterior of the school. So we had the gathering, nature and gardens and play. And we have heard multiple times on this committee, but also through visioning, that the natural access of this site and Winchester as a whole is really important. And so we're definitely keeping cognizant of the fact that we're in a beautiful natural setting. And we want to try to keep those relationships paramount as we move forward with any option, really. And noting that the previous site plans and schemes you've looked at so far are just really the first steps in that endeavor, and that we'll keep that primary as we develop any further explorations. So the big ideas from those, sort of taking away from the visioning sessions, was this idea of the building supporting the ruler, which is the ruler is a metric for kind of the social emotional learning side of things, but it can also be a really good metric for building response. And so we're really kind of taking into account what all of that means, and you'll see us develop that further as we go along. But that came up in the visioning. Building being connected to landscape, and maximizing the opportunities from the site. And so those two items are things we've talked about before in this group, but things we'll continue to look at. And then the rest of these bullet points, I'm not going to read them all in order, but I think these are the big ideas that we came away with, that we should make sure that we're developing at any turn, and that's backed up by all of the work done in the visioning sessions. So those are the basic visioning overview and ideas. And I'm going to stop my screen share and turn it over to Frank, Dr. Hackett, for a review of the educational program.
Probably don't need to see my email. Thank you, Chris. And before I get started, I just want to introduce Dr. Jen Alanema. Jen is our assistant superintendent who really focuses on teaching and learning. She has been and was certainly instrumental in working through the visioning process. And Chris and Charlie had mentioned what a great job that the group did. We had about 20 people who came together, and some of the things that you saw, the conceptual designs and just the kind of ideas and concepts around how we want people to work and how we want kids to work, and that kind of team approach and proximities to both the large core spaces, but also to each other as we build, I think, the idea and the concept of creating neighborhoods that provide us some both flexibility from a collaborative standpoint, but also recognizing that in the ebb and flow of a school, we oftentimes will have a grade level that may have 4 sections in a grade level, and a grade level that might have 5, depending on kind of enrollment bumps, and that recognizing the need for that flexibility as we think about how we are clustering our grade levels in our classrooms. That kind of flexibility is really important, but there's a lot of conversation around those common spaces and being able to extend learning outside of the classroom, both within the school and kind of in common spaces and taking advantage of collaboration, but also that connection to the community, to nature and to the outside, which came up time and time again. We heard from the Lynch community a lot about how much they love their current school. They love the light. They love the connectedness to the outdoors, and that really looking to see a new school that also incorporates all those things as well for moving forward. We started always with our vision for learning. This is the Winchester Public Schools vision for learning. This has been around for a few years now. I'm not going to read it for you, but it does encompass the things that we believe that we see for our children and for our learning community, that we want our kids to be balanced with both with their academic and their social and their emotional well-being as they make their way through our school system, and understanding that we cannot, kids can't learn if they're not taken care of socially and emotionally as well. So then we talked a lot about guiding principles. Chris did show an image of some of the guiding principles that ended up getting teased out. And this is just a quote from one of the participants in the visioning session that, as I mentioned, that the new Lynch, they're very proud of Lynch. They're very proud of the staff. They're proud of the school community and the connection with both the neighborhood, with parents and students. And the new Lynch should be a building that matches the excellence of the Lynch teachers, staff, and students. It should promote best practices in the early childhood learning, including the importance of play, movement, and time outdoors, which you saw in the slides that Chris presented. With that, we also talked about our grade configurations as it stands right now. And what we are discussing with the MSBA is we'd be looking to have 6 preschool classrooms. We currently have 6. We have 4 that are currently at Parkhurst. And we have 2 that are housed at VO. We'd be looking to add an additional section of pre-K going into the new Lynch as part of an expansion. We often have and do it yearly. Have a wait list for our preschool program, and we're hoping to be able to expand that program as part of this project. We'd be looking to have currently 5 sections of kindergarten, 4 sections of grade 1, 5 grade 2, 4 grade 3, 4 grade 4, and 4 grade 5. So we are submitting for 5 sections of kindergarten, 5 sections of grade 1, and 5 sections of grade 2, and then 4 sections of grades 3, 4, and 5. So depending on how the building is designed, and we've heard some conversations earlier about the difference or the possibilities of a 2-story classroom building versus a 3-story classroom building. At some point, it becomes a bit of a just really kind of a division problem. If you have 3 levels, then obviously we have to make sure that we take and distribute the various grade levels appropriately and somewhat equally across the 3 floors. We need to make sure that our space are accessible and within the core, but accessible also for all students. That doesn't take a long time to get there. And then we talked a lot about, or began to, and you'll see within the education plan that was submitted, we really talked about, there's a lot of information talking about teaching methodology and structure. So Dr. Alanema worked with our content area coordinators, with our directors and along with the Lynch School Administration to think about what is it that we're doing and how would we see a new Lynch not only helping us to do what we currently do better but also to allow us to think about doing some things differently. So with that, I'll just turn over to Dr. Alanema.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is such an exciting project. Chris and Frank did a nice job talking about the big pieces. So I'll just give a few examples to kind of tie why the structure is so important in terms of the teaching and learning practices. So one of the things that we really, really work on is wanting school to be as authentic as of the real world as it can be. And it's been a major goal around our assessment practices, and that obviously ties into our teaching practices as well. So when we talk about nooks and crannies and open spaces, like those really, why they're so essential is because we want that to look like their learning space, much like ours does. That sometimes you're in a meeting with one person and you need a little space for that, or sometimes it's a small group. You may be exploring something as a whole class, and we really want their hands-on exploration, that ability to really move and work with whatever materials they're working on. So having those variety of spaces allows for us to differentiate, again, for the real world, but also for different learning styles. Some students work better in a small group and a large group, and we stretch everyone to work even outside of their areas of comfort, how we all grow. But we also want them to have spaces that are comfortable, that are within their comfort zone, so they can feel the success of those pieces. So that space really speaks to it. Much like the outdoor space, which everyone has talked a lot about, I won't dwell on, but I just want to add that what we're really hoping is that there's kinds of 2 kinds of outdoor spaces. What's great about Lynch right now are what we would call more those structured outdoor spaces in the courtyards, because that allows for more controlled learning things that we might be wanting to do. Maybe it's to do with planting. Maybe it's something around something that they're doing with a science or a math piece, or they're building out a garden and they're doing their computations around what that takes. But we also are hoping for that connection, the free flow out into the space that can be much more what we're really focusing on with the new science standards, which is students as observers, as explorers, really being out in nature and figuring out kind of what's happening and asking those questions. So both of those spaces really bring a different kind of value, and in our optimal builds, we would have both pieces. Also, I think one of the things that's really shifted and changed, so I had the good fortune to work through the teaching and learning piece when we did the high school, and it's so funny how much has changed so quickly. So always really thinking about how can we have the flexibility with both the classroom space and those larger spaces to serve multiple purposes now, but also in the future that we don't know what will bring. You know, in the high school, we said we need to have X number of labs around technology. Well, our goal now with most technology is that it's embedded and seamless, and it's just a tool everywhere that they pick that tool up when they need it and they set it down when they don't, rather than a place where they go to experience technology. Again, tying into our goal of just wanting that to be the authentic world experience that we all have, that when you need to get to a tool, you grab that, whatever it may be, a pencil or a Chromebook. And the other thing is really, as we talked about those neighborhoods, that idea of having students collaborate with other beyond even their classroom walls. So much like thinking of their classroom as a community, a family, or maybe a company out there in the world. The idea is your company is going to interface with others, and having them have this ability to move within those spaces in a way that is both safe and meaningful to their learning experience. And then I think the last piece that I would kind of highlight as really important is thinking about how we build in the, again, kind of just preparing for the future, and how we build in the pieces that might be needed. For example, in the high school and then the McCall edition, we made sure to have the sound lift embedded in the ceiling of all the classrooms so that we weren't trying to buy separate devices, that we were trying to hook into the technology as we go. So some of those things that are so important to think about in the design process, that really, if you've ever been in a classroom, listening to a teacher speak through the sound lift system versus just a regular classroom that does not have that, it is it's like a whole different world. And that is great, not only for our students that have auditory issues, but it is so much clearer and easier to follow for all students, and frankly for myself when I'm in there observing. So I think thinking about those pieces that we can build right in that really make an impact on the learning piece is what the community of teachers is really excited in being involved in planning as we go forward. So progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
So we're going to go into E and F on our agenda with TEP 18.
I think that's back to me.
Okay.
Oh. Can I share? Is that okay?
Yeah, you should be able to share, Chris.
Okay. All right. All right, so where we left off at the PDP was the establishment of these 6 options. So we have the renovation and the addition renovation, both of which are de facto required from the MSBA for us to explore in the PSR. And so the committee did some good work at shaving off one of the addition renovation options. And so now we've narrowed our work down, and we don't have to necessarily agonize over picking a renovation option or an addition renovation option. And so those 2 options are going to be developed more, priced, and on the table for consideration as part of the preferred schematic report, the PSR. But we do have work to do in the sense that we've got 4 replacement options that we need to narrow down to a preferred schematic option that will be further explored and completed as part of the PSR report to the state, to the MSBA. And so of those 4 options, the N2 replacement, the N4 replacement, the N5 replacement, and the N6 replacement, we had some things to talk about relative to the educational side of those. So you just heard us talk through the visioning and the educational programming and the key aspects of education. So we wanted to layer in the next component, which is the education, to help you in sort of conversation around how the education plays out for each of these options. And that's really the goal for tonight, is to focus the conversation around the education. We've had previous meetings on site and all the other things and phasing and all of that stuff. So to further that conversation, the N2 replacement scheme is this option, and the big driver here was the concept of having pre-K and K on the first floor, 1 and 2, grades 1 and 2 on the second floor, and then grades 3, 4, and 5 on the upper floor. The thinking here is that pre-K is the biggest block of classes that we have, in that there's 7 rooms for that. And then kindergarten, which has 5. And those two programmatically are similar in developmental stages. And then 1 and 2 also have 5 classrooms, as Frank had mentioned earlier. And so those sort of broke out well on these 2 floors and stacked well. And this option also, you can see some thinking around outdoor learning on multiple levels. And so the other thing to note is that some of these options have things included that we can carry into other options, the replacements. And so they can all kind of ebb and flow from one option to the other. We don't have all of these aspects on all of them, but that's part of the discussion tonight. But this option very clearly shows some thinking around how outdoor learning could be brought onto even the upper floor levels of a building. So if it's a 3-story building, admittedly, the 2nd and 3rd floors don't have as good of access to the natural environment as the 1st floor. And so we want to try to create opportunities within the architecture that create outdoor learning spaces on roof levels or outdoor garden type spaces. And that also helps environmentally with green roofs and things like that. So it has a double duty effect, and this option shows some of those outlined here, but the big takeaway is the grade configuration, and you're seeing tonight some more advanced thinking on 2nd floor, 3rd floor concepts to couple with the 1st floors that you saw last time. So that's the N2. The N4 replacement, which has always been a 2-story school, is here, and that would be replaced on top of the existing location for the Lynch school. The thinking on grade configuration here is that it would primarily be broken up into pre-K through 2 on the 1st floor, and those are the rooms that those are the grades that all have the 5 classrooms, so 5 classroom spaces on the 1st floor. And then the upper floor having the 4 classroom spaces, which is 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And that kind of breaks itself out nice and evenly along that sort of main corridor, with the STE and art spaces maybe coming up on that core as well. But then everything to the south side of that on the 2nd floor would either be some kind of roofscape or lower level 1st floor, or tall volume spaces like the gym, media, things like that in the center. So that's how the 2-floor scheme breaks out there.
Let's go quick question, Chris, on that N4. What is driving that it has to be flopped on top of the existing building? It just,
that's
what is driving?
So this is go ahead.
Is there a use in the substructure? That was the reason that we had to do it for high school here. Sky is the limit, right? Because why do we need to flop it on top of the existing school?
So the short answer is that there would be no reuse of structure on this one. The response to this was that there were, if you remember, there were actually 3 other ways that this exact same scheme were displayed on the site, and they were in places that are not on top of the existing school, and they were found to be less advantageous than an option that just replaced on top of the existing location, and those were previously discarded in other conversations with the building committee.
Well, okay. The point I'm trying to make is the only reason that I could see is to flop it on top of the existing one is in case if you're going to reuse the foundation, may say. But if that's not the case, why do we need to flop it on top of the existing?
Yeah, I think there are 2 reasons that one might consider this scheme. The first reason is that it disturbs the least amount of site because it's on an existing building footprint. And the second is that it's the only option that's 2 stories. So if a 2-story option were important, that would be a reason to consider it. The other locations where this was a 2-story option got very deep into the Wellfield site, and then one of them was all the way on the fields. So, I mean, we may not consider this, but those are the 2 reasons why we might consider this approach.
I mean, here we have room to play around to shift this, you know.
But not for a two-story building. It does not fit on the site if it's a two-story building without going into the well field.
No, the well field line is the dash line right there, you know. It's so there's room to play here. So I think unless there's a valid reason we are reusing the existing foundation, there's no reason that we need to flop it on top of the existing building. That's all I'm trying to make a point here.
Yeah, I think there actually is a benefit, Gita, so I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what the potential benefit is. It's possible that there are cost savings to demolishing the existing building and excavating in place and building a new structure in a hole that you've already dug. That would be a reason to build it on the site without using any of the existing structure. You may not like that. You may not care about a two-story building versus a three-story building. Some of the other options may be more appealing, but this is the only option that actually uses the hole that is dug when the existing building is removed.
When we have the existing grades in front of us, we can talk more, but you know, considering this is just a shallow foundation, it's nothing more than that. So there's so much that we can accomplish considering the grades drop dramatically beyond the chain link fence. So the point I'm trying to make is once we have the existing grades in front of us, if the school is completely vacant, we have room to play here. We can we can achieve everything that we wanted by shifting it to the north to accomplish all the benefit that we need with the layout that we are considering, instead of pushing it towards so much to the north. That's all I'm trying to say, because this is only shallow foundation. There's no point in the PDP recommended. They're not considering of reusing it. So
right. I think that's what some of the other options are, Kita.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying.
I'm going to take the chance to sort of redirect and get us back to talking about the educational side of it and the program. We've spent a lot of times in previous week talking about land siting advantageous stuff on the exterior of the building, but I wanted to kind of redirect into the notion of the two-story school and the configuration of how that applies when you talk about a two-story school. I mean, the notion of putting this anywhere on the site, we could revisit that at some juncture, but the theory and ideas embedded in a concept of a two-story school is really what we're trying to focus in on for this conversation tonight. So I just want to keep that in front of us and make sure that people are grasping the difference between, say, this option having distributed over 3 floors versus this option having it distributed over 2 floors, and the nuances there. I'm happy to help describe those if those need more definition, but we'll go to N5. So N5 is here, and this is, if you remember I'm just going to try to highlight the differences. So N2 has the 3 grades on the 3rd floor. N5 has 3 grades on the 2nd floor. And so what we're trying to do here is tease out some taller spaces. You can see those on the 2nd floor with the X's through them, and making a connection to sort of a media center put vertically centered in the building, so on the middle floor. And that would also be a 2-story space, but only accessible from the 2nd floor. And then the 4th and 5th grade being on the upper floor. And those are the two grades on the highest floor. So this is a concept of saying we're going to group 1st and 2nd and 3rd versus the previous concept that was grouping 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And so you end up with a larger floor plate in the middle of the building, which is vertically centered when you talk about the circulation there. And then N6 is a scheme that puts the 3 grades on the 1st floor. which ends up being pre-K, K, and 1. And then we're grouping second and third on the second floor. And here you can also see that we didn't need some of the space above the pre-K 1 first floor. So I was presuming that maybe we could figure out a way to have some green space up there for play and learning and have that accessible to the students. And then like the last scheme, 4th and 5th grade are grouped on the upper floor, 3rd floor there. And, you know, these are concepts that got a lot of thinking to do on them, but for concept and graphic to sort of visualize where the 3 grades are happening, you've got 3 different ways that happens, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, and then how those break out otherwise. And then you've got the 2nd floor, the 2 floor option broken out that way. And so I think that brings us to this last slide, and where we really will drop off and let's listen to the committee dialogue about the educational benefits of these and pros and cons of each. And if there are any questions or details that I can answer or go into more depth about educationally speaking for tonight, we're happy to do that. So with that, I'll pause and let the committee have your discussion.
Mark, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, I'd love to ask Dr. Hackett and Ellen Emma or 2 questions. The first is the relative benefit of a 2-story school versus a 3-story school, one way or another. And then the second question is, if it's a 3-story school, do you see any specific benefit in the exact groupings of which floor has the 3rd grade and how the grade groupings are organized into learning communities?
Great question, Mark. Jen, I'm actually going to let you take a crack at this, and I've got a couple.
Do you want me to stop sharing so you can see each other, or keep sharing? How would you like this?
I don't think she wants to see me. She sees me all day long.
If you need me to stop sharing, just say so.
It hasn't gotten any better, Jen, this morning.
You can't just distract with these pictures. That's not enough, you know?
Can I just remind the committee, if you go in the upper right and you click the view button, you've got a lot of options there, so you can both see what Chris Blesson has up and you can see everybody on the committee if you'd like. You can maximize and minimize.
Sure, I'm happy to. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Colleen.
No, I was just going to say it might be helpful in the background to have the way that the program broke out between each. Maybe we can have that.
I think it's actually written on these.
Yeah.
Right. The intent of
here.
this slide is it gives you the summary of each of them.
So I was just going to say, I think there's probably pros and cons to each, obviously, like anything. One of the things that's interesting about this elementary school, different, say, from our others, is the preschool component. So normally when you're working with, right, K through 5, you have 6 grades. There's kind of an even split. When we have the preschool, obviously that makes us rethink which grades we want to cluster and which we don't. Academically speaking, you know, when you think early education, it's really pre-K through 2, and then 3 through 5 is more like upper elementary. But certainly, as you pointed out, Mark, right, grade 3 is kind of that swing grade. So I think from the educational perspective, just really, and any of these plans would really serve that ability to collaborate with others. Certainly we wouldn't, and none of these plans have that, really have one grade by itself on a floor. So this allows for that flow, and also just the real logistics, which is, although we put up all of our sections where we are this year and what we're intending for, you know, next year for sections, we all know there's an ebb and flow that continues with constantly. So having the grades kind of at least partnered up allows for us to go up a section and down a section without a different grade, one section of a grade moving to a different floor. So I don't think from the programmatic piece, there's really one that I would say is a better option than the others. I think Chris hit on some of the things that are really important to us. I said to Frank, my dream that we have greenhouses on the third floor, who's ever up there. So I think that trying to ensure that grades have access, but certainly the older kids, which, you know, we've all talked about and they've thought through the plans, it's easier to have the older kids be more mobile coming up and down stairs to be able to go outside and explore, and having the youngest on that ground floor is essential. Otherwise they'd spend their whole time getting them ready and getting them up and down the stairs. So
I would just add to that, that, you know, in terms of 2 versus 3, it still becomes about travel time and how much distance there is for kids to get to certain places. So a really efficient 3-story classroom wing may in fact be more beneficial for students to be able to get to maybe they can get to the media center more quickly. It allows, I think, for, you know, the longer that the bigger that footprint is, the more students are going to have to walk. So obviously, it really comes down to the design. I think you know, certainly TAP A will give us some great options, but I don't. You know, ideally you wouldn't have 3 stories, but in a lot of ways 3 stories makes sense too. So it really just depends on what the layout looks like, and what the adjacencies are. As Jen said, just kind of building in that flexibility for the grade levels, knowing that sometimes we have 4 sections or 5 sections or 3 sections, depending on what's going on with our enrollment.
Thank you both.
Mark, does that answer your question?
Jay, can I follow up?
And I have a follow-up to this, Don. Thanks. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
No, go ahead. I didn't put my hand up. Go ahead.
I wanted to, I thought Mark had a great lead-off question. I'm going to ask it in a little more focused way of Frank and Jen. And so I'm wearing both hats here. So now I'm going to wear a school committee hat and sort of acknowledge that over time we have enrollment swings. We have enrollment growth, enrollment shrinks, and it's certainly helpful in our schools when certain classroom spaces are sort of interchangeable, right, from one grade to another. So functionally, a kindergarten classroom is very different than grade 1 through 5. It's larger by program, typically has a dedicated bathroom. It's a different animal, and the same can be said for pre-K. So in my mind, I think of pre-K and kindergarten classrooms as being more of the same thing architecturally than, let's say, grades 1 through 5. And what kind of intrigues me then about option N5 there at the middle of the bottom row is it's one in which on the first level we have pre-K and K, and I'm imagining 3, 4, 5 years after the building opens, depending upon demand for pre-K and K, some flexibility there that we would always have when pre-K is adjacent to K. But then we go up a floor, and instead of 2 grade levels, we actually have 3. And architecturally, and Charlie and Chris have to correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, there's really no difference, right, between grades 1, grades 2, grades 3. And that's interesting to me because that suggests more classrooms that can afford some flexibility should there be swings in enrollment across 2 grade levels. And I don't see quite that flexibility. We move to the right because the middle floor is, of course, just, it's 2 grades, grades 2 and 3. So I wondered if either first of all, I'll let Charlie say if I've got that right or wrong, but if I've got it about right, I'm just curious what Dr. Hackett and Dr. Ellen Emma might think about that, kind of comparing and contrasting those 2 options, thinking about long-term shifts in enrollment.
Chris, this is Chris. I think I would generally agree. So the pre-K and K rooms are different size and very specialized, really in their response. So architecturally speaking, I think that's what you were saying for those rooms. And so when you group first K with pre-K and K, you really only end up with the 5 rooms dedicated for first grade that are flexible, and then you end up with the 5 for second grade on the second floor. So speaking to N6. And so if you want to say there's like one potential kind of bubble room on the second floor for N6, but on N5, since you've got the 2 grades that have the 5 rooms on the second floor and then the 3rd grade, you would potentially have those those two bubble rooms, I guess, is really kind of said differently, but saying the same thing. And then likewise, the third, the N2 replacement option, grades 3 through 5 are all 4 classroom sections, 4 section grades is what I'm trying to say. So that's 3 through 5. And so the third level really doesn't have any bubble space built into it on that one. But you do have, I guess, some bubble space on the second floor of that one, given that those 2 classrooms are, those 2 grades have the 5 classrooms. But yes, I would say grouping does make a difference in that scenario. That for most flexibility, you probably want to have your groupings not in pre-K and K. You keep those together if at all possible, and then have the differentiator being, are you grouping 1 through 3 or 3 through 5?
I appreciate that, Chris, and I apologize. I should have said at the outside. In my mind, I'm already sort of discounting N2, and I want to just say I appreciate how hard the team, how you and Charlie and the team were working to come up with a replacement option that stayed within the confines of the site we have. And I think that's kind of why the scheme looks the way it does. And I hope, Jay, I mean, maybe not right this moment, but maybe we circle back to it tonight. I think that, given the interest that this committee has in the Wellfield site, the support that the school committee and superintendent have towards having it, and that, management understands this, seems to be supportive. I don't see much risk. It's just a matter of pulling it together, for town meeting. So I appreciate the pains that were taken on N2, but I'm inclined to discount it given the support we seem to have in town, and I'm much more interested. Leaving N4 out for a moment, when I look at a 3-story building, I'm much more interested in N5 and N6 for all the reasons we've already said. I mean, we're still going to need swing space, but just being able to move the building into that parcel somewhat is going to minimize that need a bit. So I should have clarified that, but I appreciate your remarks on level 3 on N2. Can I just ask, do Frank or Jen have any thoughts though about the flexibility of N5 versus N6, just seeing we've got the opportunity for 3 grade levels on one floor?
It's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, I definitely agree with N2 and all the comments that have been made on N2. From a practical standpoint, I don't know that there's much difference between N5 and N6, just from a daily operation, educational standpoint. Jen, what do you think?
No, and it's interesting too, because like we were talking about, even with the technology or changes, right? What if we decide to go back to looking at possible multi-grade classrooms and all of those things? So, under our current configuration, all these things really matter, but, may matter less if we try to do other configurations. So I feel N5 or N6, either one really works for what we currently have.
I think if we're given the 5 classrooms at grades 1 and 2, then I don't think there is a difference. If we're not able to get 5 classrooms at, say, grade 2, for example, if the MSBA doesn't allow for that, then I would see it differently.
Well, I think Chris was maybe trying to articulate the idea of bubble classrooms if you consider grades 1 and 2 with 5 classrooms each as being the bubble classroom grades. That if there's any chance of deploying classrooms to different grades because you have a year where you have a problem, then those 2 grades that have the 5 classrooms are the ones that you would have the opportunity to use. And it is possible that it does make some sense to get those 2 grades into the middle of the building if this building is being vertically zoned. And what N5 does is it puts 1 and 2 on the middle floor. as opposed to putting one on the lower floor and having it more isolated, where really fundamentally, so if you put it on the middle floor, you can say, well, we got a problem at 5th grade. We're going to have one classroom drop down to the middle floor. Oh, we have a problem with 4th grade. We'll have one classroom drop down a floor. Or if we have a problem at 1 through 3, we have available. So if you think of it that way as a section, it may make sense to put our extra, they're not extra classrooms. They're based on your need for them, based on school committee policy for how many students per classroom. So I'm not saying they're extra is completely the wrong nomenclature. But if there is any chance of flexibility around extra classrooms, it's going to be those 2 grades with a 5th classroom each. So from that perspective, there may be something worth pondering with putting the and the other issue is if we have this as you mentioned earlier, if we have this, it's not as easy as 2 grades per floor anymore because we have pre-K. But if we're going to have an extra grade, maybe you want to put it in the middle as well. So it's worth considering that.
Right.
Thank you.
Don, you had a question?
Yeah, I just would like to point out that it might be a good idea to get some feedback from the Lincoln School principal regarding 2 floors versus a 3-story school building and how well it works at Lincoln. And actually, it's 4 stories I'm not sure if the basement rooms are still being used, but back when we were arguing over whether to rebuild Lincoln or build a new school at Mystic, the basement rooms in the Lincoln School had more ambient light coming in through the basement windows than the new school would have had at Mystic School. But I think some good feedback on 2 versus 3 could be obtained from talking to the Lincoln School principal to see what they like or don't like about how it works there.
Okay. Plus VO and Ambrose are 3 also.
Okay, same thing then.
Yeah, so we probably have a few principals we can talk to. And Todd, question?
I was wondering, would it be unusual or odd to have a 1st grade in a pre-K or K classroom? This would, if you had more pre-K, K on the N6 option, then on some years you might have 1st graders in a kindergarten classroom.
I can start and then maybe Dr. Hackett can answer, but I think programmatically, in case of emergency, you do whatever you have to do, and you'll put kids where there's open spaces. And I think, yes, you can teach 1st graders in a kindergarten room, but they are different. The kindergarten program is typically different than the 1st grade program. So I think you would probably be changing out some furniture. So where the difference is largely the fixtures and furniture and equipment. And so you would have to change some of that out to make it work. But, 4 walls of a classroom can work in either space.
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be easier to have more pre-K or K classrooms in one of the buildings rather than a 1st through 3rd on another floor. I don't think you want to have kindergartens in a 1st grade classroom, right?
It's less easy to go that direction. That's true. I think that's a true statement.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, one follow-up question, just to make sure I understand the way that the classrooms are currently cataloged. So as shown here in the documents that we've seen tonight, there are 5 classrooms each for 1st and 2nd grade, and then there are 4 classrooms each for 3rd, 4th, 5th. And that's based on the current need of the school community here. But if I understand it correctly, wouldn't that mean that the next year there would be 5 classes needed for second and third, and then the next year there'd be 5 classes needed for third and fourth, and the next year there'd be 5 classes needed for fourth and fifth? Or am I misunderstanding how students move through the school?
I think we could let Chris answer that, but there's a different district policy on number of students per classroom between. So the cutoff is second grade, and so what you really do, and it's not any more complicated than this, is you take the population and you distribute it across all the grades, and you say this is how many students we have in each section, or each grade. This is how many sections we'll need. So if we need to maintain 20 students or less at those lower grades, but we can go as high as 22 in the upper grades, then it translates into a different number of rooms.
Got it. That's helpful to understand. Thanks.
And I can clarify that. So the school committee class size guidelines are 18 to 20 students for grades K through 2, and then 20 to 22 students for grades 3 through 5. So in aggregate, we average it and say 20. In addition to that, though, the school committee has long had this concept of what we call a hot spot, and the upset limit is 10%. So that means on a school by school basis, we appreciate with variations in enrollment that, let's say you have grade 4, you could have 24 kids in a classroom. It's not ideal, but that's under that 10%, because of course 10% of 22 is 2.2, not 2. Traditionally, the school committee, with administration's creativity in the past, has pulled the trigger when we have class size enrollment that exceeds that 10% limit. We create we create space, music room, art room. We do art or music on a cart, and hire a teacher.
Colleen?
Yes, just a quick question. On like the gym placement and auditorium, are we going to have another chance to talk about some of those adjacencies and what's successful in some of the N5 versus N6? So are we strictly talking about conversation around classrooms today? Or are we able to, I just had some thoughts on the gym placement for N6 and if there are ways to carry that over.
I think you're welcome to comment on that now. And again, I think that a number of these can morph, right? So we're not saying this is it. You're not. I think I may have said this in another meeting. It's not like you have to pick the blue car today. It's just that what we're looking for is kind of a structure. If there's any impetus for a vision around organizing this building vertically, that's sort of what we want to understand. But the final outcome will probably be some mashup of the most beneficial aspects of
each of these
schemes. So I think you're welcome to comment on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned this before, but I think personally as a Lynch mom that the field is really underutilized. I love both the N5 and the N6 that it sits back further in the site. N6 is obviously my preference, but having the gym space adjacent to the field to be able to make that connection, I think is really important. And I without seeing the full scheme up here in terms of the other adjacencies, I know it's been beneficial in the past to have some of the areas that we know are going to be rental areas or areas that are community focused in rental to be grouped in terms of access points to be able to shut off the classroom part of the school. So, and I know we on the Energy Committee, which is another committee I serve on, get the money from those rentals to make energy efficiency improvements. Any way we can improve that efficiency is good as well. But I just want to, as this develops, I think that connection to the field through the gym is a really positive one.
Yep, and I think we heard that loud and clear on both those points. And I think Chris mentioned it in the sort of summary of what we learned in those visioning sessions, and we certainly learned that there's connections to the landscape and maximizing the site and getting more out of the site than you get out of it today is important. And we did very much hear that the impetus around zoning public versus less public, so that the school could be zoned off, used for weekends, used for evenings, and that was important. So I think both of those things are uppermost in our minds. And I think, one of the conversations that I don't want to let this conversation go sideways here, so I'm going to limit this to very briefly. I mean, that is one of the impetuses for a more efficient footprint, 3 stories, is around phasing and logistics and construction, but it's also around maintaining as much of the site as we possibly can for use, right? So that is another byproduct of this whole conversation, and it's not what we're talking about today. We're really trying to figure out what the district's view is on the best organization internally, vertically. But I think, Colleen, we definitely heard that stuff during the conversations we had.
Jay, one comment and one question. The comment is, I hadn't considered flexibility of the specialty classrooms as a way to, as a sort of emergency outlet for classroom space. So something that I'm sure you guys have probably already considered is vertical distribution of those specialty classrooms, particularly when they're not like rentable kind of community spaces, something like a music room or an art room within the building, so that they could they could shift uses if they had to in an emergency. And the question is, based on how you have N5 and N6 arranged right now, is there anything specific in the adjacencies of either one that seem more or less beneficial relative to being able to separate off the, quote, community center from the school? I didn't see anything that suggested that it would be problematic in either, but just wanted to ask the question.
I'm muted. I'm not muted. Okay. So the first thing I was flipping back here while you were talking, Mark, was the distribution of some of the specialties. So you can see the blue art room here and the STE. You wouldn't reclassify any kind of sped space, and I think there's one that needs to be on the first floor too. But so any kind of specialty small groups or speds, which aren't really showing up at this scale, wouldn't change. But like the instance that you needed to rapidly change an art or a STEAM type space, that's embedded in both of these options, N5 and N6, and then you can obviously see here, I don't think I can annotate, but my mouse will show it, that the cordoning off of this like larger community kind of block here, having maybe some kind of community entry off this side and then some kind of school entry maybe off the south side for N6, and then you could have just a kind of larger lobby here that connected the gym and the cafeteria and then the stage that kind of cross connects between the two. You could also do the same thing with the media, because a lot of times libraries are spaces that can be used for different things. So we could close off this second floor to make sure that there's proper egress, but the media being on the second floor so that it's vertically distributed, which is what we're talking about. Vertically center in section was another idea that these both are carrying. So sorry, I flipped too fast, but you could do that on both of these, that these sections are sort of inherently lending themselves to some kind of like communal breakout segregation to make sure that you can rent them safely without the rest of the building being open. But then also the art rooms and specialty classes that could become that emergency relief valve. So,
and so what we heard in the breakout, what is customary for almost elementary school, so it's not shocking, is that music needs to have an adjacency to the performance space effectively, which is going to be the gym or the cafeteria or both. So that probably ends up on the first floor because of that. And then I think that it does make a whole lot of sense to get some of the other specialty spaces at least into the potentially into the center vertically, because that means kids going up a floor, they're going down a floor, they're in the middle, or they're distributed like this, where we have them on multiple floors. But there aren't that many. I mean, there's art and there's the STEM space, the maker space, project space, and the library are kind of the three.
Chris, you had a question? And then Colleen.
Unmute. Yeah, thank you. So I want to go back to a comment Colleen made that I really agree. She was just talking about this opportunity to kind of engage the site and engage with the fields. And Charlie in his answer talked about efficiency of footprint. And I was interested to see how the conversation went tonight and what schemes we were dwelling on. So I'm going to try at least at 7:30 to come back to N2 and look for some low-hanging fruit to pluck from these six, and suggest we take it out of consideration. When I look at N2, it's almost an extruded elementary school. And as I said earlier, the TAP A team took great pains to come up with something that was, in response to a well-field parcel that was not ours. But when I look kind of plan west, and I think about how that's, without a doubt, it's right up against the setback. So I'm just thinking about, in a real way, that's almost, that's like blocking certainly visual access to the fields, having an impact on pedestrian access to the fields, which is very much contrary to, for instance, N5. Just look at how that's pulled back, and I'm imagining people entering the site from whether the curb cut stays where it is today or it moves a little bit. There's an openness here to a really special and valuable town amenity on these fields, and both N5 and N6, kind of do that. The more you extrude the plan, I think the less efficient it becomes, both kind of programmatically, but I think even just from an energy management point of view, that this becomes difficult for me to get excited about. And so I wondered, Jay, if what do other committee members think about N2, just given that we seem to be dwelling on the strengths, at least in the 3-story scenario of like an N5 and an N6. I'm not real warm on N2.
That's a good point. Colleen, you had a question also?
If that works. So I think one of the considerations actually is what, and maybe Mark would have information on this, about what this minimum distance is for us to be able to, realistically keep. And I know that's not exactly all the things that we're talking about, and that maybe that's for consideration in another conversation. But the N6 obviously gives us the most breathing room between, and assuming again that we can stay in the school and create some sort of buffer and boundary. That would be a big factor for my vote, is to have a safe buffer area, and the possibility, not to say that that's written in stone, that we could maintain majority of the population at Lynch. So I don't know what that is.
I think that's and I think that's an important point, and it's one of those things that isn't to do with the kind of zoning, but I think N5 could push north as well. So I wouldn't make a decision about N5 versus N6 based on where N5 is, because I think it could migrate upwards as well. I think so. The fundamental difference between these two options is to do with where you're putting that extra grade. If we have an odd number of grades, we don't have an even number of grades, we have an odd number of grades. So is it going on the ground floor? Is it going in the middle floor? Is it going on the top floor? Which is what we're sort of looking for guidance and thoughts on. And I guess, I think we could take that N5 option and we could move it upwards.
And the truth be told, Colleen, I'd say that N2, it doesn't offer a good buffer between the school. It's actually very, very tight and constrained. And so the result of moving it north and getting buffer actually becomes pretty much N5. So to Chris's point, N2 being something that nobody's really talking about much tonight, I think the strategy is, can we make it one scheme less hard on ourselves and focus on the other ideas relative to theirs. So I think programmatically and otherwise.
I
That's,
think
I
it
don't know,
makes
talk for
sense.
Chris.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to take N2 off the table for all the
Well,
reasons
if
that are
I
being
could
discussed. And it's
offer-
also really extruded in terms of horizontal travel distances. So that's another issue. And as Dr. Hackett said earlier, if we want to limit travel distance and be efficient with a 3-story building, there's no reason to have it 3 stories and really long.
The
Keith
only
has a
thing I
point.
could offer, Chris, is we cannot underestimate how the existing site is draining and how the field is draining. So existing ball field is draining. So that's why I know I'm coming back to the existing grades. Until we have a good handle during the construction period, we need to protect the site. At the same time, we cannot deteriorate the condition how the field is draining. So if the team can think about how the field is draining, perhaps the drainage ditch that's sitting in the middle of the woods is doing some job. With a simple light rain, the field gets flooded. So that's why I'm being pretty cautious. If we take away that that make do sort of a ditch sitting in the wooded area, then we are disturbing how perhaps the field is draining. At the same time, we need to protect the site during the construction. So that's why I'm just coming back to get on top of the things of how the existing grades are and how the existing site is draining. Obviously, there's no stormwater detention pond existing because the school was built in '60. Think about those, and then we can narrow down on the replacement. So I
think it's important. I think that any of these options are going to meet all stormwater regulations in terms of design.
I'm not talking about the school, Charlie. I'm sure we're going to take care of it. We also need to think about how the existing field is draining. And if we indeed go and take up that sort of the drainage ditch, then we need to make up that, beyond the school. In other words, we need to clearly understand how the field is draining as well. And so that if we encroach into that wooded area, we need to create that sort of a, whatever that drainage improvement that we took over, we need to make up for the field. So that's what I'm trying to say. I guess PDP mentioned there's no existing stormwater detention basin. It's just making its way to the brook. But once we have the existing grades completed, light bulbs would turn on. Maybe perhaps the drainage ditch sitting in the wooded area doing the job for both the school and the field. So the point I'm trying to make is during the construction time, we need to have a plan. Maybe we will be inundated with the heavy rain, So that's why I'm just a little cautious. That's all.
So Jay, can I just respond to that real quick?
Of course.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that Geeta's bringing this up. I think many committee members have seen the 100-year floodplain map over at Morocco, and they know that the line comes right up to the corner of the school. And many of us have seen the lower level of Morocco under 2 feet of water. So, where a map shows it versus kind of real world is not always the same. So Geeta makes some really good points. What I would suggest, Geeta, is I'm actually comparing and contrasting N2 against N5. Notice the imposition, if you will, N6 has on that wellfield parcel, that encroachment north, if you will, into many of those areas that drain. And then I'm looking to the left at N5, and a substantial portion of that building is actually not crossing that wellfield line, it is up at the higher points on the site. And I've been up there as well, and I agree with you. I think it's up to 20 feet of grade change when you're up there at the traffic circle. Yeah. And so those areas where N5 is shown crossing into the well field, in fact, are quite literally, not figuratively, but literally, like as far away from the brook as possible. And it seems to be in an area where topographically It's almost preferred. In other words, I don't believe we have we have sort of sheet drainage here into this corner. Topography will tell us that. So I'm really intrigued by N5 for all the reasons we've already talked about, the packaging of the program. I like the fact that it's taking advantage of the wellfield parcel. My point earlier, Gita, was just that with N2, such pains are taking to avoid what's really just an imaginary line. That just happens to be where a property line is. And I think it's having kind of negative consequences on the efficiency of the footprint. I think Charlie said it really well. I mean, it's a 3-story building, but you're still having to travel great distances. I would much prefer, N5 over N2, even if we keep N6 on the table.
Yeah, I mean, N2 for other reasons. I don't like it either, but I just wanted to bring these factors.
I think that's helpful. But if for whatever reason, if you and other committee members don't like N2, or if the team is sort of recommending we discount N2, we can certainly make some progress tonight in doing that. I mean, I would favor it. I think Todd has a question.
Yes, Todd.
Yeah, I'd prefer, I think, less grades on the top floor, programming-wise. I prefer N5 and N6 over N2 for that reason. And also, I feel like N2 might be the most expensive of the 3-story buildings to construct.
Yep.
Dr. Hackett.
I'm sorry, Mark. Just a quick follow-up on what Todd just said. I agree with you, Todd. As I think about, that's a lot of kids on the second level in N5. I know we're kind of talking about N2, but just trying to distinguish between, for me in my own head, between N5 and N6. 3 grade levels on that second floor feels like a lot of kids that we would be on that floor and that we'd be bringing down to presumably the first floor for the core spaces. Just feels like a lot of volume. I also think the range, just the age and developmentally appropriate range between kids who are in first grade versus 3 isn't as good as pre-K through 1 and then 2, 3. So just a couple thoughts that, in fact, a commenter, attendee had mentioned similarly, just around kind of bathroom and facility use and just the age range between kids too. So I just want to make that comment.
Mark?
In other words, just to clarify, so a member of the public had typed into Q&A just an observation about, could it be a priority for kids of similar ages to have access to bathroom facilities with their peers, for those who didn't see that?
Well, but the fact of the matter is, if you put one on the first floor with K and pre-K, it's essentially a grade 1 bathroom only, because there's nobody they're going to be sharing it with.
Right. What a luxury that would be for those first graders.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a cost. It's also a cost. While if you put it on the second floor, you're getting, you're probably, unless you have you may have multiple locations, but you're sharing 1, 2, 3. Again, I go back to that issue of trying to find the place. See, just that floor 2 in many ways is the center of the school. And that may be a little counterintuitive, because you think, well, the center is the middle, but vertically, the center of the school is floor 2. And so while Frank, you make a good point about having more students there, that's also potentially where art may be. It may be where STEM is, and it may be and it may give you that opportunity of flexibility around the extra classrooms. But I think I think N5 or N6 are better outcomes than N2. So I think it'd be great if we could get N2 off the table. And for all the reasons you said, Chris, it really was a response to available property when we didn't know whether there'd be any possibility of using the water department land.
Jay, is there any appetite for motion to take N2 off the table? Are you looking for formal action on this, or is this consensus?
I think consensus, but Mark has a question first. Mark, are you all set?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could actually take it one step further here, because nobody's talking about N4, and the way that we're talking about N5 and N6 really revolve around 3 things which to me feel like maybe the next level of development. The first thing is the exact distribution of grade levels by floor. That's one. The second is the exact configuration of the community spaces, whether they swing out to the west or they swing out to the north or they're somewhere in between. And then 3 is the location of the new building relative to the existing Lynch, where N6 is a little farther away than N5. And to me, it feels like they're probably the best schematic scheme is like an N5.5 that takes the best features of 5 and 6 and does them. Like for me, I think getting the building as far as is reasonably acceptable to the north makes a ton of sense because it gives us the best chance of maintaining Lynch as an entire school during construction, which I think has real value to the community. I don't have enough expertise to have an opinion about the exact distribution of the grade levels, and I think that conversation, there are lots of little subtle points like Dr. Hackett and Charlie, you guys were going back and forth about a couple little things where if you prioritize efficiency or access to one floor up, one floor down, you might go one way. If you prefer a certain type of community relationship between the grades, you might go the other way. So I can't really speak to that. And then the third is the exact configuration of those community spaces. And without like getting more into the details, I don't really have an opinion one way or another about that. But I do feel like an option that gets the building farther north, more like N6, is stronger from a site standpoint, in my opinion. So I'd move to actually get rid of N2, N4, and I don't know if we're allowed to
I think we can look for
smush the last two together. But
right. Vivian had a comment.
Yeah, my comment was leading towards a follow-up to Mark's, is that if we can eliminate ones that are unfavorable or undesirable, the more we can eliminate and the more we can start narrowing down, the better. It'll give us more, it'll provide the architectural team a better focus to take back the information, develop further. But our ultimate goal is by the 31st, which will be next meeting, to have a selected option so that we will have the opportunity to evaluate, develop a little further, answer all questions that are remaining in taking that option to the PSR phase. So the more we can eliminate tonight, if everyone's favorable or agreeable to, I would recommend.
And Charlie and Chris, I get the feeling that if we told you all to look at N5 and N6 separately and present them to us again, you would be taking the best of each and kind of like they would get closer over time the more that you worked on them, because you'd start to see beneficial relationships and site adjacencies and building adjacencies to the point where probably you wouldn't have two different schemes. You just have one, and it would be the best.
It's true with the fundamental caveat that where the extra grade goes is meaningful to the way it's laid out.
Brian, you have a question?
So I think you're just to finish my thought quickly. I think, Mark, you're right. And that's what I was saying before. They can kind of transmogrify and we can take the best of each. But in the end, that where the extra grade goes is an important decision. And I think in the end, it really is a community and a district decision. We can argue all we like for various nuances, but it really is about where you want these students. I mean, if you feel strongly that first grade really is most appropriate on a grade level, then that's kind of what we need to hear, because we can we can make various arguments for why we think one thing or the other, but it really is a lot to do with the district's view of where the most appropriate place for these students is.
To take off and for Jay, I guess the education visioning. I heard leaning towards controlled courtyard, and perhaps maybe 2 levels. So when I say N4, there's no reason we need to flop it on top of the existing building. No reason at all. We only build once, and this is elementary school, and sky is the limit. We just keep the kids separate, and we can. The only reason we need to flop it is if we are saving money on the foundation. Here, N4, we can articulate in such a way, move it to the north, and get all the benefit that all of us wanted. Separation from the uphill, connection to the field, and what else? The gym is the heartbeat of the town, separate entry, and getting sunlight all the time, and whatnot. So the way the N4 portrayed here is not right, and we can do so much, and that's sort of the thought that I would like to share. We build only once, get separate, and because this is a tight site, we cannot underestimate how the existing site is draining, and we need to continue to maintain that and do the best we can. And we need to rethink how N4 could adapt the best features of N5 and N6 has, and come up with a scheme, and that would benefit all of us. That's my thought. So
let's let Brian get a comment, please. Brian?
I was just going to agree with Mark's comments that we should scrap N2 and N4. I understand Geetz's point that, we could move N4 around a little bit. From an educational perspective, I've heard more enthusiastic comments about both N5 and N6. So in the spirit of the time frame and what we actually have to accomplish here, and the fact that anything resembling N4 involves much more swing space, which is detrimental for a lot of reasons, I totally favor scrapping N2 and N4 and either iterating both N5 and N6 relative to the distribution of the grades on the floors, or trying to come up with a 5.5, which merges the best of both. But we still do have fundamentally the issue of which grades go on which floors, but really just seconding Mark's comments on that point.
We got Todd and then Mark. Todd?
Yeah, I'm also in favor of getting rid of N4. I think as Geetha was saying, moving it further to the north, you're almost in the flood zone. So I don't really see that as a viable option.
Mark?
Who would make the call here? Would it be you, Dr. Hackett, about the distribution of the grades and what's optimal for the town?
Ultimately through me, but I would want to have more feedback than I have right now, Mark, from teachers specifically. We've had a great team that came together for the visioning, but we start getting close to the classroom. The closer we get to the classroom, the more important we want. So I value my life more than that to make the decision for people tonight. So, and I'd be interested to see also obviously from administration too, but I'd be interested to see how people felt about it. I wonder if it's as clear for everyone else as it is there is.
We have Lisa and then Colleen, and then maybe we can get a consensus. Lisa?
I think we should go with N5 and N6 and try to combine them together. I think we should take the N2 and N4 off the table because that's what it seems like everybody's pushing towards. And I'm wondering if we should make a motion towards that so we can at least narrow them down a little bit. That's what I think. Do we need a motion to narrow down N2 and N4, or do we put that on the table?
I think we can do it with just a consensus. I don't think we need a motion at this point. Vivian, would you be able to advise on that?
I mean, ideally, it would be nice to have a vote so that way we can make sure that everybody is in agreement and we could record it as such versus having a consensus.
I just throw out a quick contrary view, though, which is, remember, at the end of the day, we have to submit 3 schemes to the MSBA. As Vivian was just saying a few minutes ago, ideally, what we would to really give TAP A and the full team, including our estimators, all the time we can possibly give them. If we can settle on a single replacement option by our meeting on January 31st, that's going to give them the most amount of time. Yes, we can still have a meeting on February 7th. There will be that would be a great opportunity, for instance, to talk about things like constructability, swing space impacts. Member of the public weighed in tonight and was just asking about what about future expansion. That's absolutely a criteria we want to look at in any of these. Well, certainly in the preferred option, this could be something that we could discuss. So at the end of the day, we're sort of trying to cut 4 down to 1. I could go either way. I think it sounds like there's consensus to drop N2 and N4 and just ask TAP A to advance N5 and N6 and bring back a little more information for us when we meet again on the 31st. I know Colleen has her hand up too.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to agree with eliminating N2 and N4. And then there was a comment in the Q&A, and I just wasn't sure that it was entirely clear to the community, but the idea and the hope, or one of the options, especially for N6, is to maintain the Lynch School. I think the comment asked about using that space during construction. So the assumption, one of the options would be that we would have school be active during construction, then we would be taking down the existing Lynch School after the other was completed. So I just wanted, because that question came up, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
In other words, to minimize the amount of swing space that we need, right? I mean, we're saying right now we think a minimum of 8 classrooms for swing space, but what we really need, I think, is going to become clearer the more steps that we take.
John?
As we move towards N5 and 6, or some combination of them too. I mean, in Dr. Hackett's point about getting more feedback from the teachers, can that be done between now and next Monday or sooner in order to give TAP A the guidance they would need to refine them one way or, in one direction or the other? And then I guess the last question for him is there any chance in those discussions that, the 2-level, that N4 becomes something that the teachers would want to talk about, or the group would want to talk about? And I'm not, I just think that sounds like it's a very important conversation that needs to be had before we can, in how we get there by staying on the timeline of getting putting something forward by next Monday.
So I think because of the timeline would make it work. I think the first question is a little easier than the last one around N4. I do have a follow-up question just real quickly though on, is there something about N6 that would not allow for the same grade configuration as N5? Because I mean, to the untrained eye, it looks like a similar footprint. Can N6 be done with the same grade level distribution as N5? Or is that not possible? Just because it would eliminate one less piece of information here out right now.
Great.
Let me see if I can show it real quick. The key difference, Frank, is on the second floor for just trying to, yeah, so the 3 grades being on the first floor makes a big difference, because you would then drop the thing is that the media center wants to be like a 2-story type space, or at least a taller volumetric space than just 1 floor. And so it takes a chunk out of basically 2 floor plates wherever you put it. And so if we said, I think it ends up being the big thing is that the middle of the building becomes a little different. And you can see here that having the media center on the second floor in both schemes works, but then having lower elements like first floor spaces like back of house or administrative on the first floor underneath where you're putting that third grade, not third grade proper, but that third cohort, that becomes different. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. That becomes different in these. So it's not to say that they're entirely different or entirely the same, but as Mark was saying, the more that we push on these, you're going to find that media center is probably going to move. If I were to guess, if you were to put 3 grades on the second floor of this option, media is going to go downstairs, and we're going to have a bit more of a challenge trying to figure out how all of those classrooms get windows in that scheme. But it's not unsolvable. It's just telling you the big move that will have to happen based on that.
I mean, fundamentally,
saying we got a chance.
Fundamentally, if you think of it as a tube of toothpaste and you're squeezing the toothpaste out, by putting the extra, I keep calling it the extra, the odd number grade onto the first floor, you are pushing a lot of that core stuff to the left and you're pushing it north, right? In other words, something's got to move to get that extra grade in. So that's why that stuff's sliding up the sheet. And this is the most simple, basic way of explaining it. But by putting first grade on the first floor, we're not displacing, we're keeping, but we are moving other program elements. So that is making those major program spaces are obviously moving to the left, and they're moving up in order to fit first grade. While if you look at the other scheme,
but if it was the only chance, if it was the
I'm just trying to say that there are fundamental differences in the outcome, which is fine, but they come out differently because of where you put that grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering whether we're making a decision on a false choice right now between how many grade levels we have to have at each floor, and whether or not that's really the question we should be answering on the difference between these two. Because if they could both have the same grade configuration, then I would rather just wait, and I would rather see that play out a little bit more. I'm not clear, and I know you are, but maybe you are, on really what is the cost of having the same grade configuration between the two options.
Frank, can I make an observation?
Well, you can't have the precisely same scheme with the grade on a different floor, right? It's just impossible.
Do we need a 2-story media center, for example? I mean, what are the choices that we would have to make? I just feel like making a decision right now, here tonight, or even next week, if we are going to be stuck with that grade configuration within a week, then we can make the decision. But it would just be nice to have a little bit more flexibility and just understand what the consequences are.
So Chris? I was just going to observe, Frank, that to Charlie's point, so there are fundamental differences, and they're inescapable. Tube of toothpaste, I guess, is a good metaphor. They're fundamental, but they're also really consequential. I would suggest that if the committee tonight, and I think we're there, if we have made such progress as to take 2 off the table, we've done good work. And perhaps, Frank, you and Jen and other administrators that you see fit could have an offline conversation with TAP A, later this week, and can get into some of the nuances of this, because as you know, I mean, the TAP A team's working really hard, and there's always new information. Perhaps you guys could take some time offline to better understand this and ask other questions, and then we come back on the 31st and have that conversation. You might be at a different place in terms of understanding the consequence of these 2 options. And I don't think we're obviously not going to make that decision tonight. But I agree with Charlie. Something's got to give. And maybe we just need a little more time to kind of understand the nuances of those 2. But I think we're there in terms of consensus to take 2 and 4 off the table.
Todd?
Can you put the last slide back?
Motion.
Well, I mean, at this point, I would make that motion that we remove N2 and N4 from further consideration for the PSR submittal for the replacement option.
Why don't we hold and let Todd we'll take one last comment from Todd because he was waiting.
Sorry about that, Todd.
And then maybe we can we can do that.
Could you put the last slide back? The N6. So from this here, I see you could possibly move the first grade where the green roof is, move pre-K and K left, and put the cafeteria where pre-K is. So I think you could make this work as a like a N5.
Okay.
Yeah, I think our statement is not that you can't. We can. I'm confident we can make anything work. Right. It's just the adjacencies of having like gym next to cafeteria with kitchen and back of house all situated in a place where you have, a nice, good drop-offs, all of the sequences work. I'm not scared about making it work. That's not, we could definitely do that. You could also put the media over where the green roof play is and do other things. I just think that it's not going to be the precisely same, and nor do I think that what you're looking at on the screen in any case is going to be what you build a couple years from now. So I think these things always ebb and flow and iterate as much as they can. What we're trying to drive at is, and maybe taking precise architecture off the table and just saying, we really need to get some clarity on if it's going to be a new building and we end up taking N2 and N4 off the table, and we're focused in on a 3-story building, we really do need clarity on which floor gets the third cohort, because that just ends up having so much impact on how the other floors shake out. And you could do that without real precise architectural drawings. We could just take it into a conceptual vacuum and say, from teaching and learning, how do we want this to shake out? Right. And then we could probably produce 50 options based on that concept,
Right. I mean, that's kind of what we're asking for. I mean, does K and 1, do they team teach? Just one and 2 more likely developmentally to team teach? I mean, those are sort of, I think, what we're looking for.
One of my favorite sayings is that when the horse is dead, dismount. And I, with all due respect to the chair of the school committee, but who is in the audience, but I do think, I think Chris's suggestion is perfect. I think if we could just have that time, and Chris and Charlie, we can hook up with you just to have this conversation and get some of get some other people in the room just to kind of have that fundamental discussion. Because I can make it from administratively and from a flow and even from an educational and collaboration standpoint, I could make an argument in my head for both. But I want to make sure that we have some additional voices in on this. So if that's amenable to the group, I think that getting N2 and N4 off the table, leaving N5 and N6 for now, giving us a little bit more time this week to have the conversation and revisiting it on Monday would be great for us.
Okay. Chris, you still have the motion?
Yeah, so moved. Somebody want a second?
Second.
Who's second?
Brian.
Brian. Can I get the screen to get a roll call?
Yep. I'm sorry.
Thank you. All right. Geetha?
Aye, but on circumstances, we get the site grading from the TAP-A as soon as possible, That's my thought on that. I continue to emphasize that.
So
how are you voting?
Yeah, how are you voting?
You got to vote.
You can put amendments on it.
I echoed my thought to the point, it's just not taken. What can I say?
All right, so that's a no then.
The site grading is very essential. We should have it from day one. So
just to going back to our vote, like I'm 98% certain they can figure out the grading, and the stormwater mitigation is not going to disregard how the water falls in the adjacent fields. Like, all of that will be taken into consideration, but picking a footprint is fundamental and previous to that,
Yeah, just like on one hand, I thought the education vision, they preferred 2 levels. But anyway, I'm not going to stand in the way, but I'm just saying whether we are pushing too fast, that's all. We only build it once, that's all. I know the timeline is under the gun, but I'm all for making the connection, you know, giving the daylight as possible, making the gym heartbeat of the town, all the things, you know. So it's just not clear in my mind whether the gym is continue to get the daylight or whether it will be under one. So anyway, so yeah, so I'm saying aye, but I just wanted to go the site grading completed, and so that we could have it in front of us, what we are talking about. I'm not talking about the proposed grading, I'm talking about the existing grading.
Okay. Mark?
Aye.
Chris, motion. Brian? John?
Aye. Yep.
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Colleen?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
Aye, so moved.
Wait a minute, Lee, how about me? Yes.
Oh, sorry, Lisa.
That's okay.
Are you in favor?
It's okay, Jay.
Yeah, the screen. Okay.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
Jay, can I just go on the record and say I appreciate and I appreciate and agree with Geeta's comments and interest about grading. And Geeta, if we don't get the topographic information soon, you should join me out there with my laser level and we'll just go spelunking ourselves, because I'm convinced it's at least 20 feet, even though somebody says it's not. I think you and I have been standing at the same place, just at different times. So I'm happy to go check that out. Jay, believe it or not, we are actually like almost on schedule at 8:09 instead of 8 o'clock. So I think this has been a really good discussion. If it's okay with you, if we're ready to move on to the subcommittee discussion.
Yes, please.
Appropriate?
Can I just add one thing, a piece of homework for Charlie and Chris? The question about expansion, future expansion, I think it would be helpful at next week's discussion just to understand, if you had to add a block of classrooms, where would you add it in N5 and N6? I think that would just help clarify all our thinking, because we know that's going to happen. We've seen the middle school, we've seen the high school.
Absolutely, and that's one of the requirements the MSBA has.
Okay. Chris, you want to introduce the subcommittee letter that you put together?
So committee members, you should have gotten an email from Jay earlier today with access to this in the project drive. So as we all know, there's quite a lot of interest in a sustainability subcommittee on the project. And as Charlie has indicated, at this stage, certainly really no work to do at the PDP stage, a little bit of opportunity at the PSR stage, vis-a-vis contributing to the lead scorecard on the project. But we also feel that, you know, to have a subcommittee, we need to actually say we have a subcommittee. We've had quite a few meetings, people raise their hands, which is great. And I think we all are in agreement that any member of the EFPBC who wants to be on it can and should be on it and contribute. A subcommittee, you know, that's going to report back to the EFPBC is a public body, so we need to kind of establish what the role is of the subcommittee, who's on it. We've talked certainly in the abstract about some folks outside of the EFPBC participating, including, for instance, Ken Pruitt, who's our town sustainability director. And so back to a point Charlie made at the previous meeting, as a part of the PSR submittal is the lead scorecard, and that is something that this group could certainly weigh in on. So really trying to seize the opportunity to establish the subcommittee and make clear what sort of even bigger and maybe more meaningful contributions lie in the road ahead. So I have drafted something that Jay shared with the committee tonight, which is a policy that basically establishes the subcommittee. I'll review with you guys real quick. Section 1 really cuts to the chase present day. The subcommittee may review and make recommendations to the EFPBC on the lead scorecard to be included in the PSR in March, with the goal of supporting a LEED certified project per the guidance of the school committee and as stated in the project RFS, which I think you all have seen. In addition to this, it does go on to say the subcommittee may make EUI target recommendations, preferably benchmarked against other similarly sized and recent school projects. The point there simply is that I think for some on the committee who understand EUIs and what the numbers mean, many in the public do not. So I'm almost envisioning when that conversation comes up, there's a grid and we can talk about a new Lynch and what EUI target may mean relative to some other school projects in design or recent. Then we get to sort of what the committee is and how it functions. So membership shall include interested members of the EFPBC. Mr. Pruitt, by the way, I think Jay shared this with him earlier. Is that right, Jay?
Yes.
So Ken, I think, is excited to be a part of this. EFPBC members, Mr. Pruitt, the DPW director, Jay Gill, or his designee. And then the district's operations director or designee, that would be Andrew Marin. Thirdly, the subcommittee there's some legalese here, public body per Mass General Law, so we have to comply with open meeting law, have to give notice to meetings to the clerk posted within the 48-hour OML requirement. The subcommittee's chair will be responsible for coordinating the agendas with Mr. Nardone, with Vivian or Andy, with Charlie, Chris, and team at TAP A, and Andrew on the district side. The subcommittee chair and vice chair shall be appointed by nomination and vote of the subcommittee as its first order of business at its first meeting. Chair and vice chair can serve up to a year, though they may get reelected for additional terms. This is a long project, remember. And then fourth, this is the part that I was particularly most interested in. So once the Lynch project preferred schematic is voted and approved by the MSBA board, of course, at that point, we have a project, I put in air quotes. The subcommittee shall, 5 items here. First, meet periodically with the architect, OPM, project subconsultants, and utilities to develop models for evaluation of the design, building elements and systems, as well as utility incentive programs. We've talked a little bit about that before. Number 2, hear of and consider building design, systems, and components which will support a possible net zero ready Lynch replacement project, lead goals, and the project's EUI targets. Third, periodically review draft findings and specifications as they are presented at key project milestones. Fourth, report regularly back to the EFPBC with any recommendations. And then fifth, address any specific requests of the EFPBC as they may be made to the subcommittee. Tried to keep it on one page. That's it. So yeah, Jay, we were just looking to get some reactions to this, and hopefully we can vote this, and we basically establish the subcommittee, and then you might do a roll call, and as many people on the EFPBC who want to participate can do so.
Right. Open it up for any comments from members?
I think the construct of this sounds great to me. I typically think of LEAD as a ruler and not a design guide. So while it's great for benchmarking how great we're doing, I just want to say that out loud because I know there's all the good and wonderful things that we're going to be able to accomplish with this school. We may not get credit for all of those with LEAD. And given our location of where we are in the suburbs and both transit and density, it's kind of a tough, I think we can get to gold, but platinum would be a real challenge. And I don't want that to diminish any of the real things that we're going to be able to do. So I think it's a good start. And as long as I guess my question is, are we limited in any way in the sustainability subcommittee of commenting on, things that are unrelated potentially to energy or LEAD? Is it sort of comprehensive sustainability? So if there are things outside of both the LEAD rating system and EUI targets, I'm thinking about like materials and things like that may be captured under LEAD, but just wonder if there's limits to our.
Yeah, can you hear me, Colleen?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is Chris. So I that's not the intention to be limiting. So I'm happy to participate in this subcommittee myself. I have no time or bandwidth to be a chair or vice chair, so I will make as many meetings as I can. One of the things I'm looking forward to talking about would be like the expectations of the contractor in constructing the envelope, and American Air Barrier certified, and talking about the importance of a technical mock-up, right? And thinking about thermal bridging and talking through the importance of that. So I think because this is a design project, I almost feel like in almost every decision on this project in some way, shape, or form can be viewed through almost like a sustainability or green design lens. I feel that way anyway. So this was intended to be, let's say, as specific enough and broad enough as it both could be and needed to be. So trying to walk sort of a line here, trying to set some expectations for the committee, but no, it's not intended to be limiting.
Also, if something wasn't approached in the subcommittee, it can always be brought to the EFPBC as an issue.
Yeah, that's a good
If
point.
there's something that you see that you can't address in the subcommittee, you could always bring it to the full committee. Todd, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if here it kind of reads that the subcommittee will share ideas after the preferred schematic is approved. Shouldn't we be involved during this process of the schematic option?
So I think, Todd, if you want me to jump in on that, Jay. So I think the TAP-A team is looking to meet with the committee very, very quickly. In other words, there's some lifting to do even for the PSR. I think to Charlie's point, and I may put Charlie on the spot here for a moment, we don't really have a project until the board votes the preferred schematic. So this is maybe a reflection of the kind of hurry up and wait mentality. We have these bursts of effort and bursts of energy. We submit everything to the MSBA and then we sort of have to wait. I think we have one more round of that. And then once they vote the preferred schematic, then it's really on us. We have to get through town meeting, of course, in the fall. Not that that would hold up the committee by any means. I mean, once I think they vote the preferred schematic, we'll have clarity on the direction of the project and work for the subcommittee. Is that fair, Charlie?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the fact that we're facing a couple of different constraints. One is time. We really only have a month to put this together. And then the fact of the matter is that all we're really doing is, again, providing the MSBA with diagrams and systems narratives and a lead scorecard. Those are the requirements of the submission. So that's why we want input and guidance on sort of aspirations for lead. And I understand Colleen's point is a good one, which is there's more to it than that. However, at the moment, that is really what the deliverable that we need to submit. And the kind of costing we're going to do is really continues just to be square foot costing for now. So you will, I think that part of that lead discussion is going to be a systems discussion because we need to do systems narratives. So the expectation is you'll be talking to our engineers as part of this exercise, as well as our sustainability consultant. It's just we have a limited window to do it in, so we're not going to get into it in great depth, and I don't think we're not going to get into discussions with utility companies and all until we get to the beginning of schematic design.
Todd, you have another question?
No, he just answered what I was going to ask.
All right. So can we take a vote to form the committee?
Well, I think what I would suggest, Jay, is there's sort of two steps to this. The first is I would make a motion that we approve the policy establishing the Lynch Replacement Project Sustainability Subcommittee as presented.
Okay, second?
I second.
Colleen? Okay. Oops.
And then once we vote that, now we've sort of created it. And then it's kind of the next step, Jay, is to just go back around one more time and figure out who wants to do this.
All right, so this is the vote to create. And then Geetha?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Colleen's already on. John?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, so we're all in favor. Committee's formed. Next will be who wants to be a member. All right, Mark, Colleen.
How do you virtually step away from the table?
What you'll say is you'll participate as much as possible, but you're not going to be a member.
Chris and Todd as well.
Chris and Todd.
So who do we have again?
Chris,
Mark, Colleen, Todd, and Chris.
Yeah.
The four of you?
Can we join anytime, or does it have to be now if you want to? Like, I mean, if I would be interested if you're talking about geothermal, if I can offer some thoughts, you know.
So Geeta, I think it's important now just to be clear who the members are, because it's going to help us understand like when we have a quorum. But to your point, because we're a public body, we have to post the meeting. So you and anybody else on the committee can always come and speak to any particular issue. But it would be helpful to understand if it's just the 4 of us or is it 5 of us.
Okay, so if I may ask, maybe to clarify, do you think, is it too early you guys would start talking about energy production between solar and geothermal at this point, or it won't be happening now?
I think, Geeta, the question is, yes, we would start talking about those things because those are mechanical systems that need to get into the PSR. I want to be sure the design team hears that and is agreement with that. I mean, I know I think we're still trying to figure out how we think about geothermal and what we can budget for geothermal just in the feasibility stage. You know, I know Vivian, you gave us some information on costs for wells on Swampscott, but I don't know that you were able to find the evaluation piece. And in other words, discussion about geothermal, just since Todd mentioned it, has a cost component, right? So, and that's important, particularly to understand like the life cycle cost.
I believe, Colleen, wasn't it you that mentioned that you
I'm trying.
It's harder than it is.
I'm trying.
Yeah, I mean, I would be part of it. I wanted to be part of it. The only thought I would offer to Vivian and Colleen, MSBA had some in their website of the schools, and they have some info as well. So
the cost that they have, Geeta, is the one that very similarly is
more than the cost at this point. Vivian is just a track record of perhaps along the MSBA, you know. Anyway, this is not the time to talk about it. So yes, I would like to be part of it, just because I can offer my professional thoughts, not to stand in the way. But I thought it would be a good track record to collect it from MSBA, which school have gone ahead, and of course they had some insight which didn't go the way they wanted and whatnot, you know. So all in all is all right. So take me in, but mostly I'm interested if I can offer some thoughts. You know, that would be helpful.
Okay, so it's Mark, Colleen, Todd, Chris, and Geeta, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to say once again for the record, I have no time to be chair or vice chair. However, I will send out a doodle poll to those of you who are going to do this, and we'll include Andrew, Jay. We need to hear back from Jay Gill.
Right. Let's wait for Jay Gill's designee.
Yeah, and we got to hook in with Ken Pruitt, because what we do need to do is actually schedule the first meeting, and at that point, the group can kind of figure out who wants to be chair and vice chair. It will not be me. So we just got to get that meeting scheduled and then posted with the town clerk, and Vivian and Charlie, of course, will be participating as well. As OPM and architect, or Andy on Hill's behalf. Okay.
If possible, it would be beneficial if maybe we did it an hour before this meeting. That way, you know, people can make the discussions and then jump off and right into the EFPBC meetings.
That's how we did for you.
I actually, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like we might want to give it its own space instead of having to have a hard stop, you know.
Vivian, I agree with Charlie, and just we also have some staff folks we got to loop into this as well. And
I think daytime probably makes sense, and I think we'll just have to try to circulate some possible time, and we need to get our consultants teed up as well. So let's do that offline, but.
And that's something the subcommittee can also figure out, right? Is what works out like for a regular meeting schedule moving forward.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Great.
All right. Very good. Next meeting dates. January 31st, we're hoping to get the preferred schematic. I think we're in a good shot for that if everything goes as scheduled. Get the schedule up there. February 7th, Chris, can you explain that a little bit between the two boards going to the Sure. Board first.
Actually, yeah, and I'll just make a comment too about the January 31st. Here's another reason why 5 p.m. is not so great for sustainability. So January 31st, Frank and I have a school committee meeting. We're actually voting at our FY23 budget. We don't typically meet on a Monday, but we need to vote the budget by the last day of January. So I think the school committee, Frank, I don't know if you're able to confirm that yet. We have a school committee meeting tomorrow. We will nail this down. I think the goal is for the school committee to meet at 5 p.m. on the 31st. We will be meeting virtually. That meetings shouldn't take more than 30 or 40 minutes, so we should be able to start the EFPBC at 6. You see the note there on the agenda with the asterisk. We just have to confirm the timing. If we run into any trouble there on timing, there's the potential that the EFPBC would need to start a little bit later, but I don't imagine it starting later than like 6:30. So Frank and I just need to, wrap this up with the school committee tomorrow night, and we will. And then on February 7th, so we're planning, we will meet at 6 p.m. like we always do. SB means select board. So the select board, they actually meet that night at 7:30. They've requested just a general Lynch project update. We will do that, and we need to coordinate with Hill and TAP-A in terms of sort of what information is being provided, but it's pretty high level update. And then that will then segue into some discussion with the select board and management about the transfer of that Wellfield parcel. Perhaps as early as the 7th. I don't know that it'll happen that quickly, but certainly perhaps, the select board may direct management to begin drafting an article to put on the spring warrant, which would be great. So at the 7th, we're going to talk through the actual steps necessary to transfer the parcel, and hopefully, Jay, we may have an update through, Meg and others on where we stand with pulling that information together on the parcel. Then on February 16th, it has been suggested to me that being volunteers as we are, holding a meeting on February 14th might not sit well with spouses and significant others. So this was suggested as an alternative. It's a Wednesday. And we were looking to see if that meeting works with the EFPBC. I think, Charlie, you were thinking the 16th would be a good meeting to talk perhaps about more things like construction logistics, swing space. We could certainly talk more about expansion options, although we will have already, picked a replacement scheme by then. Maybe you can just offer a little insight, Charlie, on the kinds of things we can continue to talk about on the 16th, even though that's, your estimators already have the information and so forth.
Right. At that juncture, the schemes have been sent off to the estimators. So, Chris, I think what you said is right. It might be a good opportunity to catch up on these other topics, which are really germane to the estimating exercise and also ultimately to the how the town wants to approach this. But available swing space, how we might treat swing space, and of course construction logistics, lay down space, construction traffic, all those topics I think would be worth going through possibly at that meeting.
It might be a good opportunity, for some more public feedback on many different elements of the project. And then just as we had a formal vote to authorize Hill to submit the PDP, we would need to do that on February 28th, given that it's due on March 3rd. So more details to be, I think, developed on other stuff for the 28th. Do you mind, Jay, if can we ask the committee what they think about that week of February 14th? Is February 16th an option for members?
Anyone have an issue? No.
I saw a thumbs up from Mark.
I have to leave at 8:30, but if we adjourn before 8:30, then it's fine.
I have a housing partnership meeting that starts 7:30 on that date.
So 7:30. So Lisa, if we started at 6, just given the kind of we obviously plowed through a lot tonight. The schemes would have been submitted by then. My sense is we could cover a lot in 90 minutes.
Yeah, we're happy.
I don't mind going between the different meetings.
The design team's happy to commit to an hour and a half and no more. We just create a hard stop.
Yeah.
That would be fine then.
So why don't we plan on that, Jay?
Yep.
That'll be an oddball Wednesday meeting for us. More details.
I may have a conflict, just so you know.
Okay.
Okay. Got a lot done tonight. Any other comments or?
Do we have any spending authorizations to approve?
None.
Okay.
No.
Not tonight. That was just a placeholder, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did well. We were targeting an adjournment at 8:20. It's 8:33. So I think we covered a huge amount of ground. This discussion on all the options was very helpful tonight.
Fingers crossed for PDP comments from MSBA, you think, Chris?
We have not received any yet.
Okay.
We get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
I second.
Pauline. All right. Geetha?
Yeah, aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
And Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, so moved. Thank you, everyone. This was a great night.
Good
Good
meeting.
job, everybody. Thank you.
Nice.